11 Pacific Rim countries have reached a deal to proceed with the Free Trade Trans-Pacific Partnership plan without the U.S. They include Canada, Mexico, Chile, Japan and Vietnam. The deal was reached on the sidelines of the ongoing Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Vietnam. President Donald Trump took the U.S. out of the original 12-nation agreement soon after he assumed office in January. The TPP talks don't include China, which is also attending the APEC summit. Well, Wayne Hay is joining me live from Da Nang. Wayne, do we know any more about this free trade agreement that excludes the U.S.?
Yes, well, certainly it was inevitable that on the sidelines of this APEC summit that a lot of the talk would be about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The remaining 11 nations in that deal are all APEC members, and there was a lot of hope that they would be able to get some sort of agreement going here to keep moving forward with the TPP, of course, without the US. But there have been complications, and it seems that many of those last-minute objections to the deal have come from Canada. So with me now to discuss this a little more in depth is a former Deputy Canadian Trade Minister, Don Campbell. Don, what exactly is Canada's opposition to what we're seeing at the moment in the TPP?
Well, I think first of all, Canada's in a fairly difficult position because Canada is in the midst of a very major NAFTA negotiation, and the implications of a TPP on the NAFTA negotiation are an issue. Having said that, Canada, as some other countries, are trying to roll back some of the disciplines that were included in the TPP, and they have called for a progressive, and you'll find the word progressive being used in the language now, for a progressive agreement that includes environment, includes gender equality, that includes labor. So those sets of issues. Canada is also, I understand, I'm not part of the negotiating process any longer, but Canada is also looking for some changes in the dispute settlement provisions of the agreement. And I think that there is a more general view among the TPP 11 that they may need to put in abeyance the intellectual property provisions, which were largely driven by the United States when they were there.
So if these reports are true that a deal has been reached in the early hours of Saturday morning, it's probably far from the final agreement. Is that fair to say?
I don't think it's near the final agreement. People are talking now about core principles rather than agreement in principle of the whole agreement. My concern, of course, is that there has been a momentum developed, largely led by Japanese leadership, and if that momentum is lost, we may not find a TPP in the foreseeable future.
Obviously, a lot of attention here also about Donald Trump and his attitudes towards trade. As you mentioned, Canada dealing with that on a couple of different fronts. Do you think that the US president is now giving trade a bad name? Because every time he makes a speech, it's in a negative connotation.
I think he's giving trade a very bad name. I found that the content of the speech, while it made the usual niceties of what he calls an Indo-Pacific, which I find an interesting term to start with, the core of his speech is deeply troubling. It rolls back, I think, 70 years of progress, starting with the Havana Charter and the GATT and the WTO and multilateralism, largely led by the United States through the last 70 years. And his approach of a bilateral set of arrangement goes back to a previous world of what I would call dog-eat-dog, where the powerful prevail in agreements and others get left out. I think this is a very, very negative approach to trade, and the real issue, of course, is not trade. Populism has emerged in many of our societies, in no small part because people feel they have been left out in terms of the economic progress and the benefits of economic progress, and trade is the easy scapegoat in all of this.
And probably a difficult question to answer in a short answer, but how do you handle that then? As you say, Canada dealing with the United States with NAFTA and with the withdrawal from TPP, so you can't afford to simply walk away from the US, particularly for a country like Canada, which shares a border.
Yeah, well, it's not just sharing a border. More than 75% of our trade in goods and services is with our neighbor to the south. And that will continue, regardless of what happens. It will continue under more difficult circumstances if the NAFTA is not successful. So it is a difficult set of issues for Canada. Canada is not going to walk away from those NAFTA agreements, and we're hoping that over time that the pressures that are being placed by the U.S. business community, by congressional forces, by all of these things, will somehow temper this unbridled enthusiasm for destruction.
All right, Don, thanks very much. It's certainly a fascinating watch to see how the trade landscape shapes up, particularly under the presidency of Donald Trump. At the moment, we're seeing the APEC leaders attending their retreat, and that will be followed later on Saturday with the joint communique about what the leaders have managed to achieve at this summit. And then the US president is heading to the Vietnamese capital, Hanoi, for an official state visit, and he will also be joined there on Sunday by the Chinese President Xi Jinping.